Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Euractiv event on closed-loop recycling, where we're going to be talking about what can help and what can hinder. My name is Dave Keating. I'm a journalist based in Brussels, and I'm coming at you live from the Euractiv studios at the heart of the EU Quarter. So, first off, what is closed-loop recycling? Well, it's a process where packaging is collected and recycled into new packaging, or converted back to a raw material. The key difference with closed-loop recycling is that the loop can be performed indefinitely without losing its properties during the recycling process. So the benefits of such a system are fairly obvious. By reducing the production and use of raw materials, closed-loop recycling minimizes harm to the environment and discourages resource depletion. So it's in contrast to open-loop recycling, where a product is recycled, but it has to be mixed with new raw materials in order to become a new product, and this typically leads to downcycling, where the recycled product is of an inferior quality to the original. Now, there's lots of different recycling methods, and the key question is, which method is best for each type of recycled material? Now, we're also going to be talking today, not just about when closed-loop recycling is appropriate, but also how policymakers can get this balance right. Last year, the European Commission launched the EU Circular Economy Action Plan as one of the main building blocks of the European Green Deal. The proposals that make up the action plan are set to influence almost every stage of Europeans' lives by ensuring that products and materials we see everywhere, from the home to the office or school to doctors' clinics, are all truly sustainable. Now, part of that action plan is an upcoming review of the Packaging and Waste Directive that will aim to ensure that, quote, all packaging on the EU market are recyclable or reusable in an economically viable way by 2030. It'll build on the last revision of the directive that set new recycling targets for packaging, measuring the actual recycling of packaging materials, not just collection rates. So the question we'll be discussing today is, what role will closed-loop recycling have in the revision of the Packaging Waste Directive and in the Circular Economy Action Plan more broadly? And how can it be most appropriately applied to all the different materials that we recycle, which includes, of course, glass, plastic, and paper as some of the obvious ones? And we'll talk about what types of recycling schemes best improve collection rates so we can get materials into the recycling loops, whether they're closed or open. Now, you guys at home will be able to participate in this discussion. You can send in your questions to the panelists using the chat feature there in your Vimeo screen. Just go ahead and start typing in your questions now, and I will pose them to the panelists at the end of the panel. You can also participate in the debate on Twitter using the hashtag EADebates. So let me introduce you now to our panel of experts who will be discussing this with us today. We have here with us Rosalina Petrova, a member of cabinet for the EU Environment Commissioner Virginijus Sinkevicius. We have Finnish MEP Sirpa Pietikäinen, who's a member of the European Parliament's Environment Committee and a shadow rapporteur for the new Circular Economy Action Plan in the European Parliament. We have Vanja Veras, Secretary General at Municipal Waste Europe. We have Patricia Foslad, Secretary General of Natural Mineral Waters Europe. And we have Vanessa Cheno, Product Policy Manager at the European Container Glass Federation, FEVE. Thank you to all of you for joining us here today. Rosalina, why don't we start with you, because I've talked a lot so far about what the European Commission has been up to in this area. So what does the upcoming review of the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive have in store in the area of closed-loop recycling?
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank Euractiv and FEVE for the initiative to organize this discussion. Indeed, recycled content is a very exciting area where we see a lot of promise and opportunities. We've already seen what very well targeted requirements on recycled content can indeed bring in the context of the requirements that were set with the Single-Use Plastic Directive, where we already have indeed minimum recycled content first for PET bottles with targets for 2025, and then for all bottles with targets for 2030. And this measure has been indeed extremely successful in linking all the actors in the value chain in order to ensure that we close the loop for plastics, because when first we started with the plastic strategy and with the Circular Plastic Alliance, and we had all those pledges from the industry, we saw that actually while a lot of the recycling industry is ready to supply the material, actually, there is not so much readiness. There was some, of course, but not so big in terms of volumes for the producers of the products, which is indeed in a greater extent packaging, to take on this recycled content. For instance, in the area of plastic, this is very important because we see that 40% of all the use of plastics is for packaging, and the plastic packaging is responsible for 60% of all plastic that becomes waste. It is like this because basically plastic packaging becomes very quickly waste, and at the same time there is still a huge sustainability challenge to prevent plastic pollution. So this measure actually put all the actors in the value chain, from the ones that collect waste, be it municipalities or EPR schemes, to those operators that sort the waste, and those that recycle the waste, to see, and also those that develop new technologies, to see, okay, how do we solve this problem together? How we ensure that we can have safe recycled content in the end in the packaging? And this has been quite successful. And this is also what we are trying to explore for other products, materials as well. And in the new Circular Economy Action Plan, as you mentioned, the recycled content features quite prominently on a number of places. First of all, it features as part of our Sustainable Product Policy Initiative, because we would like to see where we could explore this further, not only for plastics, but for other materials. And we actually already did this with the revision of the batteries legislation. So now we have a proposal for new batteries regulation. We proposed recycled content targets for some key materials where we know that the regulatory push could make a lot of difference. And for instance, now we have on the table recycled content targets for cobalt, for lithium, for lead and nickel. So, and then we really want to see how we could explore this instrument further. So, of course, this would be relevant for the review of the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive as well, and also for the forthcoming review of End-of-Life Vehicles Directive as well, and for the Sustainable Product Policy Initiative. Of course, what we always want to see is where there is really a market failure, because as legislators, when we have to act where there is really the market failure, where we see that if there is this regulatory push, we could get to more sustainable solutions, and we can help the market function properly in order to ensure this circularity. And this is what we are looking at the moment, and indeed conversations like that are very useful in order to touch base with all the parts of the value chains. Here we have it in municipalities, we have also the recyclers themselves, and then indeed to see what is the best way forward. So thanks once again, and looking forward to the debate.
Thanks, Rosalina. So, of course, anything put forward by the Commission then goes to the co-legislators, the European Parliament and the European Council. So let's turn to the European Parliament next, Sirpa. I want to check that you can hear me. I know there was a bit of trouble connecting, but I think we've got you now. So I'll go ahead and ask my question to you. So Sirpa, do you think that closed loop recycling is important for the circular economy?
Yes, indeed, and the technology is on place very well right now. It is on the core of circular economy. First of all, of course, you should plan the goods and products to be as long living as possible, and you need to use the principle of having all the goods, when possible, to be replaced, repaired, modular, so that the parts can be reused and the material can be used as such in the same place. So how you plan this loop and how you define the circularity is important. And on the crux is designing out of the waste on the process of product design, because if you have a bad product design, you can collect whatever waste streams you want, and the level of reuse is pretty poor, and there you need the extended producer liability. And then again, the next step, sort of having these demands and requirements to reuse the material, right, very much on place. Then the second or third issue is actually the deposit schemes, because the material comes as a value in the process, not a cost like a waste. And then, of course, while there is extended producer liability, there's also extended producer rights on this side. And that needs to be acknowledged and protected.
Thanks, Sirpa. So let's go to Patricia next to get the perspective from the Natural Mineral Waters Europe. Patricia, what is your perspective on closed loop recycling and where it best applies?
Thank you very much, Dave, and I'd like to extend my thanks to Feve also to inviting us to together for this interesting exchange today. So closed loop recycling, it's a very important topic for us, and there is no way that closing the loop on all its packaging is a top priority for all our members. Even more so that the packaging materials that they are using are highly suited for that purpose. Indeed, for decades, our members have been investing in lightweighting and in eco-design, with the result that today, whether glass or PET, refillable or one-way, obviously depending on the consumption channel, both are fully recyclable, and they can be used and reused in new bottles over and over again. However, currently we're facing a challenge, which is there is not enough recycled PET available on the market for us to close the loop. So for this to become a reality, we need clearly an increase in collection, an improvement of sorting. Also, an important factor would be access to our recyclable packaging material, because it is so successful that many other, including non-food sectors, are using recycled material that we put on the market. So that's making that's making it difficult for us to fully close the loop, meeting the targets in the SUP directive, for instance. Therefore, we also believe that a wide deployment of DRS across the EU and an increase also of recycling capacities would help towards fully closing the loop. Last but not least, I do believe that we need a mind shift, because what we observe is that amongst consumers, if they deal with packaging, if glass packaging bottles, they see it as a resource. They have the certainty that if they dispose properly of their glass bottle, it will be taken care of and it will be reused. Unfortunately, we're not witnessing the same awareness at the level of consumer when it comes to PET bottles. And this is a great pity, because both packaging material are valuable and can participate in the circular economy. So this mind shift is very important, not only towards closed loop, but also to avoid litter. What we can say, I think, if we look at Europe, is that we're already quite well advanced towards circularity for packaging. We have collection and recycling rate that we can already be quite proud of if we compare it to other regions. But with the right measures in place, we can fully close the loop on our packaging. And this would be a major achievement.
Thanks a lot. Let's go to Vanya next. So coming from the perspective of Municipal Waste Europe, Vanya, what materials would you say is closed loop recycling best suited for?
Okay, so this is a trick question in many ways, so I will treat it as such. When we talk about closed loop recycling, the most problematic materials generally, or material, is plastics. And so my direct answer is any materials eco-designed with the purpose of closed loop recycling are suitable for closed loop recycling. Everything else has to be treated in a different way. So if at the end of separate collection, sorting, and treatment of separate streams, there is an amount of waste which we call residual waste, either directly from the consumer or as residues from sorting and recycling. These must be treated in a different way. So there's a couple of things that are gaping holes in our waste management system globally, and particularly in Europe as we're in the EU. It doesn't matter how good our separate collection system is, how good our materials are. If the situation continues where there are untraced shipments of waste within and outside of Europe, we will continue to lose waste to the wrong type of treatment or even to landfills or dumps. Currently, this group of unchecked operators are called brokers and dealers. They are mentioned in the Waste Framework Directive. They are not registered anywhere as brokers and dealers. Their waste shipments, their notifications are not registered. And so there is no way of tracing these quantities of waste. And a lot of recyclable materials are lost in that way. I'm just going to say that for now and then wait for your next question.
Let's turn to Vanessa next. So Vanessa, why is closed loop recycling important, and I'm thinking in particular for the glass sector?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave, and thank you to all of you for being with us today. So closed loop recycling is extremely important for the glass industry, because we believe that glass is really a perfect material for the circular economy, because it is 100% and infinitely recyclable in a closed bottle-to-bottle loop without losing its properties, be it in terms of food safety or in terms of recyclability. You can recycle it over and over again. It will not degrade. So it's a permanent material. And on top of that, glass is reusable, it's non-toxic, and it's inert, making it one of the most effective packaging materials for protecting food. So with that in mind, of course, we want our material to stay in the circular economy for as long as possible. So today, almost 8 bottles out of 10 put on the EU market are collected to be recycled in Europe, and the vast majority goes back to glass packaging production. So we have already achieved a very high performance, but we can do more, and we want to do more. Because recycled glass is our most important raw materials, and the amount of recycled glass we can put in our production directly depend on the availability of glass, recycled glass. So that's very important for us, because introducing recycled glass in our production brings major environmental and decarbonization benefits. So just to give you a few numbers, if you increase by 10% the level of recycled glass in the furnace, you decrease the energy used by 3% and the CO2 emissions by 5%. So that's significant. And on top of that, you also reduce reliance on virgin raw materials, because 1 ton of recycled glass replaces 1.2 tons of virgin raw materials. So for us, it's very important to increase recycled content in our production, because that brings major benefits. So that's really a win-win solution for everybody. So we do promote closed-loop recycling, and that's the reason why we initiated a multi-stakeholder partnership, which is called Close the Glass Loop, and which is actually supported by Vanya's and Patricia's organization, to really work together to boost the quantity and the quality of glass that is collected in Europe, and ultimately the level of recycled content in packaging. So I would like to thank all of our panelists for joining this important discussion on closed-loop recycling today, because we collectively can do more, and as Patricia mentioned, we need to put in place the right measure to be successful. So thank you very much, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Vanessa. So we've already had a lot of great questions coming in from you guys at home and the audience. So I'm going to get to those pretty quickly, because you guys have a lot of great questions. Keep them coming. You can put them in the chat box and I'll read them out to the panelists. I have a couple questions for the panelists first, though. I wanted to ask you all about the issue of consumer choice and kind of what consumers can do here, because I think for a lot of people, recycling sometimes feels a bit out of their control. They can make sure they sort everything like they're supposed to at home, but then once things go off to the recycling facility, they don't know if it's closed loop recycling or open loop recycling or what's happening to that item. So how do you all think that we can empower consumers to be part of this process? And also when we're thinking about recycling methods, how do we let consumers know how their recycling is being handled and maybe give them a choice? Rosalina, what do you think the Commission can do to help consumers be more part of this process?
Thank you. That's one of my favorite questions, because it doesn't have a straightforward answer. Of course, we all agree that consumers have a great power and that they should form a part of the transition towards a more circular economy. And there are a number of ways how we can do that. We can do that by raising awareness. We can do this by better information. For instance, we have foreseen in the new Circular Economy Action Plan an initiative whereby we would like to harmonize the systems for separate collection at the EU level, so that which also includes certain options that will look even at the covers of the bins, at which could then be reflected on the packaging, for instance. And this is something that we are more and more asked to do, actually, not even from the consumers, but from the business side, because there are apparently such initiatives being taken at member states level, while we would like to preserve our internal market and to ensure that the labeling is not something that prevents the free movement of goods. So that on a side note, but we can do a lot to empower the consumer, but I believe really that we have to make it also easy to the consumer choose sustainable products. So that's why our new approach, in addition to empowering consumers, is really to work with minimum requirements so that all the products that we place on the market are actually sustainable, and we don't put the burden on the consumer as such, because we are all consumers and we know how limited time and possibility sometimes we have to make choices, and there are a number of factors that influence our choice on know the products that we buy. So I think that everybody has to take their responsibility, authorities in regulating properly business, in ensuring that they strive for the sustainability, and then finally consumers. But let's say let's not put all the burden on the consumers. That's where I would end.
Sirpa, I saw you nodding at this issue of the consumers. How do you think we can get consumers, your constituents, more involved?
Well, I think that there's a lot of willingness and activity already there. And that's why I was nodding, because I like the Commission's approach that the system should be pan-European. I prefer that we would have the common set of rules for all materials in the whole Europe. But that doesn't mean that the rules and collection system needs to be the same for the cardboard and plastics and glass, because all of these sectors are different. But sector-wise, whatever you do, that should be harmonized and clear to apply and clear to use. And then if we have a strong regulation that actually puts the requirement on genuine reuse of the materials, this is on place to increase the consumers' confidence. Plus then, I mentioned once, I'm still mentioning the deposit systems, because I think that this is one point showing that this material does carry a value for the consumer and for the process and industry in general. And then, of course, if the systems is reliable, the consumers can rely better on it. What I mean is that nowadays you have too often the news telling that, okay, yes, they were separate collected and there was no reuse, and then they were incinerated or just stuffed on landfills, and that of course is not very good for the consumers' trust on the circular economy and recycling systems.
Vanya, this is probably a question most relevant for you. So when we're thinking about all of these different ways that recycling can be done, how do we get consumers involved in that process?
Sorry, there's something going on in the room that I'm in, so it might be a little bit noisy. I'm at another conference. So, yes, I totally agree with both what Rosalina and Sirpa said. I think that harmonizing labeling systems throughout Europe, so that consumers on the one side can very easily understand. Vous pouvez fermer la porte s'il vous plaît, je suis en réunion. So consumers can understand what they're buying, and once their packaging becomes waste, which bin to put it in. The benefit of harmonization is that it doesn't matter where they are, in their own country, at home, in the office, on the road, or traveling for business, on holiday. They will understand very easily which bin to put it in, and that helps the waste management sector after that to collect cleaner, larger quantities of the same materials, and then follow on with sorting and treatment. On the side of the companies, it's very important that they move to the production and use of materials which are fully recyclable. Today on the market, we do have many materials which are not practically recyclable. So they might, in theory, be recyclable, but there are no plants, and their recycling is not economically viable. So to facilitate the whole process, we should be moving towards a system where the products that are put on the market are 100% recyclable, and that on an ongoing basis. But that's the principle of a circular economy. There is one discussion at the moment that I'd like to bring up, and that is, it's a big discussion, it's chemical recycling, to be used on plastics which don't have a technical or financially viable recycling option today. This discussion started calling it, or with a process called depolymerization. So taking the plastic back to its polymer and then being able to reconstitute it into a new plastic of any type. That, if it can be made financially viable, is a way to make plastic 100% recyclable and on an ongoing basis. Now, there is also the risk that chemical recycling is and would be understood as pyrolysis. Pyrolysis is a waste to energy technique. It does not recover the material and it does not end up as new plastic. And therefore, this can in no way be classed or understood in a legislative or practical form as recycling. And we are adamant about that. That would not lead to a circular economy. It would lead to more fallout from the circular economy. Thank you.
Well, we have some questions from the audience on chemical recycling, actually, so we'll come back to that in the discussion for sure. Patricia, I want to go to you next. I mean, you are facing consumers. So how do we get consumers involved in the whole life cycle of a product?
It's a very interesting question, and without wanting to put too much burden on the consumer, indeed, they do have a critical role to play, because at the end of the use of a product, they do make the difference by the way they treat the packaging into considering it as waste or disposing of it properly and giving it a new life. So this is really critically important. But I also agree that there's a lot we can do to make this choice easier for them by installing the right infrastructure. For instance, for on-the-go consumption, we see too many bins overflowing with valuable packaging materials. So this could help them, sorting bins in the area where there's affluence of people would be extremely helpful. Was mentioned EU harmonized sorting instructions. I think this is clearly very important because consumers now are moving widely across Europe, and to be faced with different instructions, colors, etc. across Europe is not very helpful. So identical sorting instructions on all packaging, I think, would be reducing confusion and improving sorting greatly. Then I think it was Sirpa who mentioned the role of DRS in that field. Clearly, when you set up a DRS system, you incentivize consumer to return their packaging, and this can be done in an increasingly easy fashion because now you have machines that take whole bags of packaging. And we think also that in the future, digitalization might give us tools to make it even easier for them to take an active role in turning a packaging into a resource. Digitalization option, reading on how to dispose of packaging properly would probably become a reality in the near future and also help us reach that goal.
Yeah, I can definitely concur that for people who move around EU countries, the differing recycling schemes can be quite confusing. I've lived in 5 different EU countries, and each one has a different scheme. Particularly the difference between here in Belgium and in Germany, where I also lived, is quite different. For one thing, the colors are reversed, but more confusingly for me was the glass collection, actually. So to go to Vanessa, so for instance, we have a quite different method of glass collection in Germany than in Belgium. When we're looking at Europe as a whole, what is the packaging value chain's ambition for glass collection and recycling? And would it be better to harmonize all the different methods of collection, or is it best that each country has solutions that are tailored to local situations?
Yeah, thank you very much for these important questions. How long do I have? So I was telling you that 76% of glass that is put on the market in Europe is collected to be recycled. So what it means is that 24% of that glass packaging is not collected and is lost for the bottle-to-bottle recycling system. So we want to get back this 24%. But as glass manufacturers, we can't do it alone. That really depend on whole value chain to work together and collaborate to increase the collection rate. So that's what Close the Glass Loop is about. It's really a multi-stakeholder partnership that brings together public and private players that are involved in the glass collection and recycling chain. So the municipalities, the brands, the producers, the recyclers, and the extended producer responsibility schemes. And together we want to achieve a 90% collection for recycling rate by 2030, and also increase the quality of collected glass, because closed loop recycling is not only about the amount that you collect, but also the quality of what you collect. That needs to meet certain requirements to go back into the production of glass packaging. So we have this partnership at European level, but we also have 11 national platforms, because as you rightly mentioned, waste collection and recycling, we discuss it also, of course, at European level, and the EU is really creating the enabling framework. But down the line, waste collection and recycling is a national and even local issue. So we really need tailored strategies that take into account the local social demographic context, the importance of the hospitality sector in a city, for example, because all of this will impact the amount of waste generated, but also create some challenges potentially for the collection and recycling value chain. So that's what we are trying with Close the Glass Loop, to address these challenges and see what best practices can be used, can give inspiration, and can be replicated with some adaptations in other countries. So you're right that today there are different ways to collect glass in Europe. So the mainstream collection system in Europe is bottle banks and door-to-door systems. So that really has a proven track record. That's how we achieved the 76% collection for recycling rate. So clearly that is a proven system. But as my fellow panelists highlighted, there are discussions on deposit return schemes, also for other materials, but glass as well. And so what we've done is to really look at what's the best solution to achieve this 90% collection for recycling rate that I was mentioning. And we believe that we don't need such system for glass. First of all, because we already, as I mentioned, is a well-functioning system. There is room for improvement for sure, but it works and it exists already. So we have the infrastructure and we need to improve it. But also, I think deposit return schemes are very discussed for plastics, for example. And the reason is that for plastics, you need a clean stream to separate food-grade plastic from non-food-grade plastics. For glass, we don't need that, because you can collect all types of glass, whether it's food-grade or not, and it will end up in the same place and it will be recycled the same way. So the more you collect in bulk, the best it is actually for the viability of the system. So what we really see that a DRS does not maximize the quantity and the quality of glass collection and recycling. And we actually see that in a number of countries, when the DRS is introduced, the overall recycling rate may decrease. And the reason is that you have two parallel streams, the DRS and the EPR stream. And the introduction of the DRS can lead to less investment in the EPR stream, which still represent the major share of the glass that is collected. So the introduction of a DRS actually put at risk the viability of the overall system.
So I want to stay on this topic of deposit return schemes, because this is a really good example of how different systems exist in different countries. I know, so again, for instance, when I lived in Germany, I was paid to bring my glass and plastic to the bottle banks. Here in Belgium, I'm not paid to bring my glass to the bottle bank, but I still do it. So it's a question of how much incentive, I guess, the consumers need. Rosalina, for the purposes of the Circular Economy Action Plan, what is the Commission's thinking about deposit return schemes and whether or not they should be encouraged or discouraged?
That's indeed a very interesting discussion. And what I think Vanessa was referring to was exactly the discussions that happened already under the Single-Use Plastic Directive, because at that time there was indeed a lot of debate whether the deposit refund systems are the silver bullet to achieve high separate collection. And then you may know that there are targets on the separate collection of bottle, or if they are the silver bullet for bottles that will kill all the others. So that is, and this is exactly the conversation that was there at the time, and that's why the question whether to introduce a deposit refund scheme or rely on other arrangement under extended producer responsibility, such as door-to-door separate collection, was left open to take account of, indeed, it's what we call subsidiarity, so basically to take account of national, local conditions and arrangements. And indeed, deposit refund systems are an excellent example of behavior, or let's say science and its application, because in this way the waste really gets value for the one that holds it, and then of course they want to get this value back, and then this works really very, very well. But then the question is, well, in order to ensure that there are no trade-offs with other materials, so that as consumers we perceive as valuable only the stuff for which we get actually this refund, while all the other is not managed as properly. Also the question of infrastructure, of course, because there should be indeed infrastructure both for separate collection and for separate collection which is not linked to deposit refund, and separate collection which is linked to deposit refund, which would then indeed there should be the funding for this infrastructure as well. So it is not an easy issue, and then the question is, well, should there be deposit refund for all the packaging? I mean, because this is when consumers may actually start returning it, but then we have to have also indeed a complete overhaul of the infrastructure, where we have this return infrastructure also for or waste to weigh the waste and so on and so forth. So it's not an easy question, and I think that this is one of the elements which we will be looking at actually at in the framework of the packaging and packaging waste directive. So that's very important. But as I say, there is no single single solution. But what I am certain is that in case there is not a deposit refund system, it should be really made easier to the consumer to take part in the separate collection. There should be enough collection possibilities, enough bins available, because now what we see, no matter where we go, is that you everywhere see a bin for mixed waste, for residual waste that will go to kind of a treatment which cannot ensure high quality recycling, or it's very difficult to do so. And it is very rare that we see indeed at the same places bins for separate collection always. So that is something which will be very important, and it is not only for the on-the-go consumption, but also for normal ways of dealing with separately collected waste, that it should be as convenient to dispose of your separately collected, so of your valuable waste, as for the mixed waste.
Vanya, you're the expert on this topic. What's your take on DRS at European level? Is it something that should be encouraged, discouraged? What should be the attitude?
Again, it's a very complex, multifaceted question. It's not, there isn't a yes or no answer to it. It depends on the material, as the glass industry said. It depends on the country's setup. And it's also very dependent on brand awareness and brand engagement in their extended producer responsibility system. This is something that's only just beginning to happen now on implementation of the 2018 Waste Framework Directive, where brands are realizing that they cannot only rely on their extended producer responsibility systems to take care of connections with local authorities, with separate collection systems, and with the public. So brands have direct access to the public through their advertising systems, and including a message on how to source separate their waste in that advertising would not cost them anything more and would have an immediate impact. So I would go there before I went to saying everybody has to have a DRS. There are very well-functioning EPR systems, for example, in Belgium, where you wouldn't necessarily need to add a deposit refund system. And then other countries where separate collection is not functioning at all, where perhaps it should be analysed and decided whether it would help and give a more direct access to the materials. So it's not a simple question.
Well, you're talking about brands there, so I think we should go to Patricia for sure. Patricia, in terms of brands, what is your perspective on DRS?
You know, as we represent natural mineral waters and spring water producers, clearly I will look at SUPD and the targets that have been set by the Single-Use Plastic Directive. So what are they? They are 77% in a first step and then 90% collection for beverage containers in 2029. So currently, if you look at the average collection rate, we are close to 60%, 59%. But if we take a deeper look at the statistics more in detail, you see that where there is a DRS in place, the effectiveness is closer to 90 to 99% to 95%, even sometimes in excess of that. So when it comes to beverage packaging, clearly DRS deliver quality and quantity. So they're really extremely well suited for closing the loop on our packaging. So this is why I think since 2019, we've come forward very clearly and once again, recently with Euractiv Europe and UNESDA, in order to request minimum requirements in the context of the revision of the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive, to lay the foundations for the recognition that DRS has a role to play, and also provide guidance as to what an efficient DRS system could look like. This said, totally agree that in no one-fits-all solution should be imposed. You know, there are a diversity of situations across the EU in this topic, as in many others. So when you would set up a central organization in a country to launch a DRS, clearly one has to have a look at the situation locally, what is collected well, what isn't, etc. So no straitjacket should be imposed, but there is certainly room for minimum requirements in that context. Voilà, this is really what we really believe, that in most EU member states, looking for the targets that have been set for beverage containers by 2025 and 2030, without a DRS in most, if not all countries, those targets will not be achievable without a DRS. For us, this is quite clear. And again, we need to keep in mind that what we need is not any material, but high quality material, because what we need and what we can use is only up to 95%. That comes from EFSA opinion. It has to be of food grade quality. So if you want to put the recycled material back into the bottle, it has to be of food grade quality, which again implies that you have a clean stream, which you are guaranteed to have once you have set up a DRS. So there are really a lot of factors that point at DRS in the context of beverage packaging as a really good instrument towards closing the loop. But again, when it comes to scope, etc., we do not believe that a straitjacket should be adopted across the EU. More guidance in the shape of minimum requirements, and it will be up to the management body at local level to see about the scope and the various aspects of the governance of the local structure.
Thanks, Patricia. So we've had tons of questions come in from the audience. I surely am not going to be able to get to all of them, but I've tried to group them into groups so we can get to as many of them as possible. So we've had 2 questions come in on chemical recycling, which Vanya was talking about. Sirpa, I'm going to put the question on chemical recycling to you first. So we have Andreas Bezenbach asks, what part can chemical recycling play in a European circular economy regarding plastics that cannot be kept in the loop through mechanical recycling? And then Oscar Gomez Prieto from Eurostat has a comment. Full support on Vanya's assessment of chemical recycling. Depolymerization is not recycling per se, especially when it is used for energy recovery and not to close the loop and produce new solid plastic material. So, Sirpa, what is your take on chemical recycling?
Well, thank you. As it says, devil is always in the details. And in this case, it is pretty big one. I'm very strongly in favor for the chemical recycling, and that especially goes for that kind of a residue of plastics that cannot be recycled in highest level to reuse, like it is the case with PET bottles, for examples. But then again, the question is, you should avoid putting that kind of a amount of plastics that you could already recycle in higher level on this kind of a chemical recycling, because there's more loss on there. And of course, as I have understood, as a process, it takes more of an energy. Secondly, and that is the fossils circle, we would need to be very sure that the recovery rate would need to be up to 70 or beyond 70, not only 40 or 30 or something that I'm hearing the figures nowadays, because then basically you are incinerating the great majority of the materials, or then you are creating like some attempts from here, you are creating fuels. But then again, of course, you can say it is reuse, but the matter is that if you need to use fuel in your fuel cars, it's better you use directly from diesel or benzene instead of creating plastics first and then converting them back to fuel. The share energy efficiency of the process tells that. So how to limit effectively enough the chemical recycling really to be on that path, that residue that can't be used in higher level, and secondly, to have effective grade 70 or beyond in the future, to avoid this incineration impact and supporting the fossil economy.
Rosalina, what is the European Commission's take on chemical recycling?
Thank you. Well, we have looked indeed with interest at the development of the chemical recycling technologies, exactly in order to be able to deal with plastic and which cannot be recycled in high quality materials by means of mechanical recycling. So this is where there has really been a problem, because I started with the figures on the demand of plastic for packaging, and of course a lot of this packaging has to be food grade quality, and some other plastic products that are not packaging also have to achieve very, very high quality. And unfortunately, plastic is such a material that retains quite a lot of contaminants, and just remelting it may not be sufficient to clean them up. So that is why indeed there are materials which are very suitable for mechanical recycling, and since it is much more efficient, those types of plastics should be preferentially recycled in terms with a more efficient process. But then the question is indeed what to do with the rest, because there are so many park benches or garbage bags that we need, and we have to ensure indeed not only recycling but high quality recycling. And this is where the chemical reprocessing of plastic waste gives some promises, and we are looking at indeed the efficiency of the process. We are working with that on that with industry as well, to see indeed what happens with the plastic there. But what we have always said also is that whenever we talk about recycling, is that the idea of putting the material in the process should be turning it back into a material, and not for energy recovery or for use as fuel. So whenever, for instance, there are those kind of uses that are where the plastic waste is turned into fuel or used for energy recovery, this is not recycling for sure. So the main purpose of the operation should be recycling, and there are different ways to ensure that. And we are also very much aware that it's quite energy intensive, the chemical reprocessing of waste. But here what we also have to ensure is, or at least to be aware, is that the recycling of all materials is energy intensive. Whatever material we get, perhaps paper is not so energy intensive as the others that had to be remelted, but it's also resource intensive in terms of water. So that's why, actually our number one aim in the Circular Economy Action Plan is waste prevention and reuse, but this is not the focus of this seminar. But we should be just aware that all recycling requires, it's like any industrial process, it requires a lot of additional resources, or in the case of chemical reprocessing, the energy that the plastic has, and that's why prevention remains number one priority.
Well, the next group of questions is about reuse. I'm going to put these questions to Vanessa and Patricia. First question from Delphine Close from UNESDA. How can the EU better support closed loops and prevent downcycling? Oh, sorry. That's not, wrong group. Here's the group about reuse. First question is from Federica Pozzi from ECOS. If the objective is to limit waste generation and resource extraction, i.e. by extending life cycle, why don't we look higher up the value chain and waste hierarchy, meaning reuse? Harald Throne-Holst asks, how can we increase reuse, increased longevity of products, rather than recycling the materials? A lot of energy is used and lost in the recycling process. And finally, Peter Barczak from the EEB says, what about closing the loop perfectly by incentivizing much more in refillables? Vanessa, I'll put that to you first. Should reuse be a big part of the strategy here, and how can it be encouraged?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I started this event by saying that glass is really the perfect material for a circular economy, and indeed not only because it is fully recyclable, but also because it is reusable. And actually, glass is really the preferred material already today for consumer reuse. So today there are functioning reusable systems for beers, for soft drinks, for mineral water as well, where reusable glass represents as much as 22% of glass packaging put on the market already. So reuse is already a reality, reusable in glass bottles. But I think what is important to have in mind is that these systems do exist, but they are typically local. And the reason for that is that reusable bottles need to circulate within the value chain from the producers first, and then to the filler, to the retailer, and the same way back. So definitely reusable bottles can be a good and sustainable solution. Glass bottles can be, for example, reused up to 50 times before they reach the end of life. But they are most suited for short supply chains if there is a consumer culture that supports reuse, and also if there is the adequate distribution network in place. And as part of the review of the packaging waste directive, there are of course discussion on how to promote reuse, and we see that deploying more reusable options really requires a systemic change of business models and of supply chains. So it's extremely complex because you need the containers, you need the collection scheme, you need the washing infrastructure. You need basically to adapt the whole supply chain for reuse. So it's extremely complex, and again, it's probably best suited for local supply chain. So, for instance, we don't believe that targets or quotas on reuse would very much help. We instead believe that we need to have this discussion on what it takes to have more reuse. Yeah.
Patricia, what do you think? Is the best form of recycling having reusable bottles?
Well, thank you for the question and giving me the opportunity to answer on that, Dave. There is one fits all answer, as always. So as far as we're concerned, Vanessa mentioned it, we are using a combination of glass and PET, and we already offer, depending on the consumption channel, reusable glass bottles. So quite a high percentage of refill bottle when it comes to glass. However, I think first of all it's really important not to throw the baby with the water of the bath, because sometimes I have the feeling that the debate is presenting as let us not recycle, we can reuse instead. In actual fact, from an environmental perspective, depending on the circumstances, the channel, the distances, the material and so on, it will make more sense, and also from a carbon neutrality perspective, to either refill or recycle. So there should again not be a kind of straitjacket and just abandon the idea or neglect recycling, because there is this possibility of reusing. In some circumstances, it will make a lot of sense, as Vanessa highlighted, to refill. In others, it will make much more sense to recycle. So here what we need to make sure is that we take policy options that are based on facts and science and not on perception, because there will be instances in which imposing refill requirements would not go hand in hand with the overall objectives of carbon neutrality, etc. Another aspect that is critically important, it's whichever policy options is decided at EU level, and we very much hope that those policy measures will be discussed at EU level primarily rather than at local level to preserve the internal market. Again, as Vanessa highlighted, we're talking about policy decisions that imply very intense changes in terms of distribution channels that imply high-level investments. Therefore, whichever way we go in the context of the revision of the PPWD, what all the operators, I'm not only talking about natural mineral and spring water producers here, the whole value chain needs consistent measures across the EU, legal certainty and visibility. You know that we are also all looking forward to recovery and the green recovery. So those aspects needs to be factored in as well.
Rosalina, how do you respond to that? Are there some situations where recycling is more appropriate than reuse?
Thank you for giving me the floor, and I just want to finish where Patricia to comment on what Patricia said. I mean, indeed, our main aim, and I think here both our commissioner and Ms. Pitikainen we are completely on the same tune. Let's say is that our internal market has to be preserved. It's our biggest achievement in the EU, and we have to make sure that it functions properly. So this is indeed something that we always keep in mind when we define requirements in the EU legislation. Then, as regards, yeah, indeed, we always have to begin the reuse, reduce, recycling tune by rethinking. And here, in particular, we talk about reuse. The question is, how can the system be rethought so that what we already see quite well functioning in business, for instance, in business-to-business packaging, that we could replicate some of those successes in business-to-consumer packaging. For instance, wooden pallets, they're standardized across the EU. They're not thrown away like that. They're used and reused and repaired many times before finally, in some countries, even being turned into furniture. Then the question is, what are those kind of initiatives or tools that could help industry engage in more sustainable reuse? We say, well, it is suitable for local. If there is certain standardization of packaging that business would like to take up, it is not necessary to be local, because then all the impact of the logistics could be dramatically reduced. But these are the things that we have to discuss broadly. What would be, let's say, the take-up of more standardized packaging? What is the science of the things as they are, and what is the science of the things as they could be? And these are the very interesting questions in such challenging areas as increasing reuse.
Okay, let's go to the next group of questions now. Vanya, I'm going to put these to you first. So first question comes from Laura. Question to Vanya. What is the definition of 100% recyclability? With recycling infrastructure being different in each EU country, are there scalable ways to test a packaging's recyclability and closed loop fit? Then we have a question from Camila Oliveira. What is the minimum threshold of recycled content in plastics that could be counted as closed loop? Because recycling always leads to losses and needs to be replaced by virgin material, mass balance approach will have a role in verifying this recycled content. And finally, a question from Delphine Close from UNESDA. How can the EU better support closed loops and prevent downcycling when other options are available? So, Vanya, what is the definition of 100% recyclability when we're talking about closed loops?
Well, we don't have a definition. This is something that may be discussed in the next revision of the Waste Framework Directive with Rosalina and her colleagues. If we just think about it in logical terms, it is with minimal losses. So throughout the recovery procedure or process of collecting, sorting, and mechanically recycling not just plastics, but any packaging, there would be minimal losses in a closed loop recycling system in such a way as to make sure that less and less virgin materials are required to supplement that production process. So on a very basic level, that's how I would describe it. I'm not calling it a definition. On minimum recycled content, there are plastic bottles, if we're talking about plastic, that claim that they are 100% recyclable today. So why can they do it? That's my question back to the industry. And what was the third question?
Third question was kind of related. How can the EU better support closed loops and prevent downcycling when other options are available?
Okay, so there are two aspects here. One of them I mentioned already. The EU can assist with material losses by ensuring that all brokers and dealers are registered within a registration system. Now that can be directly linked with the waste shipment regulation, whereby within a digital notification system, only registered brokers and dealers can enter the system to notify. This is to prevent waste going to the wrong place, because if it doesn't arrive at the sorting or recycling center and actually be fully processed in those plants, then of course we have recycling losses and material losses. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, sorry, losing train of thought, too many presentations today. Yeah, I'm going to leave it there and come back to it afterwards.
That's fine. Ness, I want to go to you next to take all these questions. We're running out of time, so this will be the last round of interventions here. But what is the definition of 100% recyclability, and how do we think about this minimum threshold of recycled content when we're talking about closed loop recycling?
Yeah, so that's an important question because the Commission ambitions to have all packaging placed on the EU market to be recyclable or reusable by 2030. So one important aspect of the upcoming review of the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive will be to define actually recyclability. So for us, it's quite, so we fully support this Commission's objective. And we indeed need a clear, harmonized, and enforceable definition of recyclability, which for us would mean that packaging materials are collected, sorted, and recycled in practice and at scale. So not only theoretically, theoretical recyclability, but real recyclability. And that process should generate recyclates that are of sufficient quality that they can replace virgin raw materials. So there are different ways of assessing the recyclability being discussed right now, but I think these are the key principles that should be stressed in that definition.
Sirpa, I'll let you have the last word on this. As a legislator, do you think there's a way to define 100% recyclability and a minimum threshold that can qualify as closed loop?
Well, indeed, 100% recyclability is 100%, and that only then would leave very small amounts that are purely technical figures or errors, or just the natural laws of physics. So I would take it to close 90 or beyond the 90, because those are the figures what we can get already with the deposit system. Let's say with the PET bottles in Nordic countries, it is 96 or 97 or something like that. So that would be a full recyclability to me. And the minimum, I would start pretty high. I would talk about 80%. beyond 70, anything lower than 70 actually, then the good question is where the 1/3 is going and what is happening with that. And then to me, it is a system failure, and you need to go back to your table and start replanning the system so that you get better figures. And quite often you would need to then think not only the system, but the materials, because some materials are pretty bad in recycling and you could compensate them with the better ones. This would be sort of my sort of out of the sleeve figure. Let's see where the Commission ends up then with the legislation. Wonderful discussion. I've been very, very interested to hear all of your talks. Almost all female panel this time, and very excited to continue this work with all of you.
Thanks, Sirpa. We can say I don't count since I'm the moderator, and then we can say it's an all-female panel.
No, you count, definitely.
Well, thank you guys so much for a great conversation. There's so much interest in this. We got so many questions from the audience. So I think this is a discussion that's going to continue for sure. I think this is a topic that people really care about because, of course, recycling is something we all do in our everyday lives, and it's really, really important for the environment and for the climate. So it's important that we get this policy framework right, and that's what all of the legislators, the NGOs, everybody, all the stakeholders are going to be working on in the coming months. So thank you guys at home for following along with us this afternoon. Be sure to tune in next time for the next EA debates, and I wish you a great rest of your day. Take care.